When the dust settled and the blessings began to overflow, I realized that the story wasn't ending with God's provision. It was only beginning. The $35 I released in faith returned in ways I couldn't have mapped out if I tried. Opportunities multiplied. Unexpected income arrived, and needs were met with more than enough left over. But with that abundance came a question that reached deeper than any financial concern now that you've experienced God's faithfulness. How will you live? It's tempting, after a season of scarcity, to hold tightly to every new resource. There's a voice that says, "You finally have a cushion. Don't risk it. Save it all. Protect it." I felt that pull. After weeks of stretching pennies and wondering how I'd get through, the idea of giving again almost felt unreasonable. But God gently reminded me that the blessing was never meant to stop with me. He hadn't provided so I could build walls of comfort. He had provided so I could build bridges of generosity. Generosity isn't just about money. It's an attitude of the heart that sees every resource, time, talent, finances, even words of encouragement, as something entrusted to us to share. The same God who taught me to trust Him with my last $35 was now teaching me to trust Him with the overflow. He was saying, "You've seen that I can supply. Now let me use you to supply for others." I began to notice opportunities everywhere. A single mom at church who needed help with school supplies for her children. A neighbor who lost his job and quietly struggled to buy groceries. A young student unsure how to afford the next semester of tuition. These weren't random coincidences, they were invitations. And each time I gave, sometimes financially, sometimes with time or encouragement, I felt the same peace I'd experienced when I first surrendered that last bit of money. The same God who had proven Himself faithful continued to prove that I could never give Him. What I discovered is that living generously after a breakthrough actually protects your heart. It keeps you from slipping back into fear, because every gift is a declaration that your trust remains in God, not in a bank account. It keeps you from pride, because you recognize that every good thing you have is a gift from Him in the first place. And it keeps the blessings moving like a river instead of a reservoir. When you hold everything with open hands, you create space for God to keep pouring in, not so you can accumulate, but so you can continue to give. Generosity also changes how you see wealth. True riches aren't measured by how much you store, but by how much you're willing to release. I learned to see each dollar as a tool for impact, each conversation as a chance to lift someone's spirit, each connection as a way to advance hope. Instead of asking, "How can I keep this?" I started asking, "How can this bless someone else?" That shift transformed my daily life, from one of constant worry to one of ongoing purpose. And something amazing happens when you live this way. Your testimony becomes contagious. People notice the freedom in your giving, the joy in your service, and they begin to wonder about the source behind it. Generosity turns your personal breakthrough into a public witness of God's goodness. It's not about showing off. It's about shining a light so others can see that trusting Him is worth it. Maybe you've been praying for your own breakthrough. A job, a business idea, a financial turnaround. When it comes, and I believe it will, remember this: the blessing is both a gift and a responsibility. It's God saying, "I can trust you not just to receive, but to release." Whether it's money, time, skills, or simply kindness, keep your hands open. Let your life be a channel through which His goodness flows to others. Because the true measure of the miracle isn't just that I went from $35 to more than enough. It's that the miracle keeps moving every time I choose to give it away. You said, now write all the chat of key points in a one paragraph. ChatGPT said, the journey of trusting God with my last $35 unfolded as a single, seamless story of faith. It began with surrendering the final seed. When I placed that small amount in His hands and discovered that true provision starts where my own resources end. In the quiet that followed, I learned to hear His voice in unlikely moments, a gentle, unmistakable nudge that called me to action even when my mind argued against it. Choosing obedience over logic became the turning point. As I stepped forward without seeing the full plan, and found peace in simply doing what He asked. From there, His provision went far beyond anything I could have expected, arriving in surprising ways and perfect timing, showing that His creativity and care know no limits. The fear that once threatened to paralyze me transformed into a powerful testimony, a story of His faithfulness that now encourages others facing their own impossible situations. And with every blessing that followed, I discovered the joy of living generously after the breakthrough, holding each gift with open hands, so that what began with a single act of trust continues to flow outward, blessing others and revealing the limitless goodness of God. Remember staring at that worn 20 and the crumpled 15 in my hand, feeling the weight of more than just paper. It was the end of the month. Bills stacked like a wall in front of me, and that $35 represented all I had left. Every instinct told me to hold on tight, to stretch it for groceries or gas, maybe skip a meal or two and hope next week would look different. But deep inside, there was a whisper, gentle, firm, unmistakable, that said, trust me with it. It didn't make sense. I argued in my mind. Lord, you know this is all I have. How can giving it away or placing it in your hands possibly help? Yet the more I wrestled, the stronger that quiet assurance grew. God wasn't trying to take something from me. He was inviting me into something greater. He was asking for the last seed, so He could show me that His supply isn't limited to what I see. Surrendering that final seed isn't just about money. It's about releasing the grip of fear. Fear tells you to save, to hide, to build a fence around what little remains. Faith says, place it in my hands and watch what I can do. When you give the last of what you think sustains you, you discover who really sustains you. It shifts your heart from, I provide for myself, to, God is my provider. I walked to the offering box with trembling fingers. That money felt heavier than ever, but as it left my hand, a strange peace filled me. It wasn't relief because the bills were paid. They weren't. It was the peace of knowing I was finally trusting the one who sees the bigger picture. God doesn't ask for the last to empty us. He asks so He can fill us in ways we can't imagine. Not long after, opportunities began to appear that I couldn't have orchestrated if I tried. A job offer from a conversation I'd forgotten, a small debt, unexpectedly forgiven, a friend who felt prompted to help. None of it was coincidence. It was confirmation that when we release the little we clutch so tightly, God releases the abundance He's already prepared. And here's the truth: the amount isn't the issue. Your $35, someone else's $5, another's last ounce of energy or time. It's never about the figure. It's about the faith. That final seed might be a phone call of encouragement you're too tired to make, an hour volunteered when you feel spent, or a gift given when you're counting pennies. God's principle remains the same. What you surrender becomes the ground for His miracle. So if you're standing where I stood, looking at a small handful that feels like your lifeline, don't be afraid. What you think is the end is often the very beginning of something extraordinary. Place that last seed in His hands and trust that He already sees the harvest. Because when you dare to give God the last, you open the door for Him to show you He is always first. When I think back to that night, the moment God spoke wasn't wrapped in thunder or lightning. There was no dramatic sign flashing across the sky, no booming voice from the clouds. I was simply sitting alone in the quiet, staring at those last $35, calculating how far they might stretch. I had the TV off, the phone face down. And in that stillness came a stirring deep inside, a nudge that was gentle but unmistakable. It's easy to believe that God only speaks in grand ways. We expect choirs of angels or some extraordinary vision. But more often, His direction comes in the quiet spaces of everyday life. Sometimes it's a thought that won't let go, a sudden clarity in the middle of chaos, or a small whisper that cuts through the noise of our own worries. That night, I felt that whisper saying, "Trust me with it." It wasn't loud, but it was sure, and it carried a weight no human thought could match. At first I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just tired, maybe a little desperate. My logical mind started listing all the reasons I should hold on to the money. Rent was due. The fridge was nearly empty. The responsible thing would be to ration every penny. Yet that inner prompting kept surfacing, calm and steady, like a melody you can't stop humming. When I finally placed that last $35 into God's hands, I had no idea what would happen next. There was no sudden flash of light, no instant deposit to my bank account. I went home with the same unpaid bills and the same empty fridge. But here's the part that still amazes me. Even though nothing looked different at first, something had already shifted in the unseen. I didn't realize it then, but the moment I released that seed, Heaven's plan was already in motion. Provision rarely comes the way we imagine. We think it will arrive in the neat little package we requested, a raise at work, a check in the mail, maybe a last-minute windfall. But God loves to surprise us. His resources are endless and His creativity has no limits. That week, doors opened that I couldn't have scripted if I tried. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months called, saying they felt prompted to recommend me for a project that paid more than I had lost. A neighbor who owed me nothing suddenly offered help with groceries. Small connections turned into opportunities that carried far more value than the money I gave. At first, I almost missed it because I was still looking for provision in the obvious places. But God's way of providing isn't just about filling a need. It's about showing that He sees you, that He knows every detail of your life. He doesn't simply replace what you gave. He reveals that His supply was never limited to what you could see or calculate. The beauty of His provision is that it arrives wrapped in relationship and purpose, not just numbers. I learned that provision isn't only financial. Sometimes it's the right conversation at the right time, a door to a job you never applied for, a sudden wave of peace when anxiety should be winning. It can be wisdom that saves you from a costly mistake, or an idea that sparks a whole new direction. God's provision flows in countless forms because He's not confined to the channels we expect. And when you step back and look, you realize it's not luck or coincidence. It's the hand of a loving Father who cares enough to orchestrate details you could never arrange. There's also something remarkable about the timing of His provision. We want it early, but He often sends it right on time, just late enough that we know it's Him, not us. That week, each new blessing showed up exactly when I needed it, never late, never rushed. It was as if He was saying, "I see you. I know when and how to provide. Trust me." That timing builds a faith that no paycheck could ever buy. And here's what I found even more powerful: the provision didn't just meet my needs, it expanded my vision. When God provides beyond expectation, He's not just filling a gap, He's stretching your understanding of who He is and what He can do. I began to dream bigger, pray bolder, and live with a confidence that my life is held by someone who is never short on resources. That realization changes the way you approach everything. You stop living in survival mode and start living with expectation. Sometimes people ask, was it really about the $35? And I tell them, no, it was about trust. The money was simply the key that unlocked a deeper awareness of God's generosity. He wanted to show me that His economy isn't bound by mine, that His supply flows even when my calculations say there's nothing left. The blessings that followed were not just answers to my financial need. They were reminders that He is a Father who delights in caring for His children. Maybe you're standing where I once stood, holding on to something small, wondering how you'll make it through. You might be waiting for a big, obvious miracle, but I can tell you from experience, His provision may already be unfolding in ways you can't yet see. Don't limit Him to one outcome or one method. Keep your eyes open and your heart expectant, because when He moves, it will be more than enough, and often in ways that will leave you speechless. Because when you trust God with everything, you discover He can provide in ways far beyond anything you ever expected.